Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's Goran Crit here, and today we are continuing our summary of all the boss fights I have experienced so far in the Pbirdman mod for Final Fantasy X. This episode will focus on the storyline bosses from the Chocobo Eater up until and including Crawler. We have a lot to talk about, so sit back, relax and enjoy the video. Now this is the second video of a series, so make sure to check out the first one if you haven't already, just to get up to speed, and as I might be referring to them occasionally. If you like the content, give it a thumbs up and hit that bell to never miss an upcoming episode. If you don't know what the Pbirdman mod is, I'll explain it very briefly. It is a modded version of Final Fantasy X only available via the PS2, and it was created by Peter Bird or Pbirdman, and it changes enemy attack patterns, sphere grid progression and layout and more to make the game much more challenging and strategic. I'm playing the 2.6F version at the moment, so everything is in regards to that specific version. Now just a reminder that there will be huge spoilers, so if you're doing a blind run or don't want to be spoiled about boss fights ahead, watch this video after you fought them to get some additional insight on the boss mechanics. So in this video I will be sharing my thoughts from experience on how the fights have been redesigned, what strategies I used and what challenges really stood out. I will go into some detail about the stats of each monster and how it differs from the original game. If you want to see me actually fight these bosses, I've put the playlist for the commentary playthrough in the description, and I will also put in any relevant links if I refer to them. Now, to be perfectly clear, I will give a star rating from 1 to 5 that is purely based on the difficulty. This is in no way a rating of how I find the modifications of the bosses in the mod. In my opinion, Pbirdman has done a terrific job with this mod, and he should get all the credits he deserves for creating it. Okay, here you can see the star rating that I will be applying to each boss fight. I will give 1 star when the boss was relatively easy or almost the same as in the original game. 2 stars, the boss fight was a little bit harder but doable with some tweaking of the original strategy that you would apply to that boss. 3 stars, the boss fight was noticeably more difficult and you had to adjust your original strategy or had to come up with a completely new strategy to overcome this boss fight. Now, 4 stars, the boss fight was significantly harder and I at least had a couple of game overs, and 5 stars means that I wanted to quit the mod, throw away my controller and quit gaming forever, and I definitely will have had multiple game overs. Now, without further ado, let's get this banquet started with our first boss. Okay, we kick things off with the Chocobo Eater. Now you encounter this boss at the travel agency on the Mihen High Road. Now looking at its stats, they are a little bit different. Now it only has a little bit more HP, nothing to write home about, and its strength and its luck are increased slightly. However, its magic stat has increased significantly, and that will come out when it's going to use its counter attack when it's lying on its back. Now looking at the resistances, you can see that it has a little bit higher slow and darkness resistant, and instead of being weak to fire, it is now weak to water, and that is something that I didn't figure out in this fight, at least when I was fighting it. Additionally, we've seen it before, this boss also has Aeon Ward. Now that means it only takes half damage from Aeon attacks, and it's also resistant against fire and ice. Furthermore, this boss is immune to provoke, but you shouldn't have provoke yet unless you've grinded a little bit, and like all bosses, it is immune to sensor and scan. Now I think for this boss, when you look at its attacks, I think almost all its attacks have been tweaked a little bit. For example, the Your Next move, like when he points his little finger at a certain character, that he will attack with its Fist of Fury, a devastating attack in its next turn. Now that Your Next, that move, because it's an actual move he does, is now rank 1. That means his next turn will come up much faster, so his Fist of Fury move will come up much faster in the turn order, so look out for that. I think in my battle, I think it was sequentially, so he did Your Next and then I immediately got killed, I think, so watch out for that. Now also, his Fist of Fury have also a higher chance to crit, but yeah, like that matters, it's gonna one-shot you anyway. Furthermore, its Blizzard attack that it does as a counter when it's lying on its back and you do a physical attack, that Blizzard is now on all characters instead of just one. Now we know that this fight happens on a cliff and you're trying to shove each other off. Now when the Chocobo Eater does his shove move, it's Pbirdman renamed it as a Thwack. So when he does that, he will absorb some of your HP. And furthermore, when he shoves you eventually off the cliff, so that's also called Thwack, but when he shoves you off the cliff, it will be technically a game over, but it will not be a game over screen. But just to say that all your frontline characters will be reduced to 1 HP. Also, when the Chocobo Eater is at the edge of his side of the cliff, or the position right before it, there will be a 50% chance that he will use the shove move, so you need terribly good RNG to actually push him off that cliff. Now, to top off that, when he either gets up, so when you've put him on his back and he eventually gets up when it's his turn, or he does the shove move, which is called Thwack in this mod, it will dispel all the breaks, it will dispel poison, darkness, and slow on himself. So if you have put these statuses on him, when he gets up or he shoves, those will be dispelled completely. So keep that in mind when you're fighting him. Now in the readme it also says that zombie will be removed, but I'm not sure if this is relevant at this point. I'm not sure if you can inflict zombie on it, but if someone knows a way, let me know. Now might also be a good time to introduce a new mechanic that Pbirdman has introduced in this mod, and that is status drops. Now status drops means that it will reduce the number of turns of your positive statuses when it does a certain attack. Now you might be wondering, Gordon, what the hell are you talking about? Positive statuses last indefinite. But this is where you are wrong, my friend. All positive statuses in this game have a finite duration. Now I also touched upon this briefly in the previous video, but positive statuses do not last forever. And this is the case especially for Protect, Shell, Haste, Regen, and Reflect. Now just to give you an example, if Yuna with a spell or Riku with a Lunar or Light Curtain casts Protect or Shell, this will only last for 15 turns. And when Tidus casts Haste, this will only last for 5 turns. Now I'm mentioning this only now because this is the first time an actual boss has this ability. In my opinion, it's a very elegant mechanic to increase the challenge in this mod and to mitigate very strong abilities like Haste and Protect that our characters can cast. Now going back to the Chocobo Eater, he has 2 attacks where a status drop is introduced. When he does a Thwack or when he shoves you, he will decrease the number of turns you have Protect by 4 and the number of turns you have Haste by 1. Additionally, when he does his Fist of Fury, your number of turns with Protect are reduced by 10. Now, maybe an asterisk here that technically you shouldn't have Protect at this stage, so I'm not sure why this is relevant, but if you have been grinding, naughty for grinding if you already have Protect. But this is just what is in the readme. And it's a good time to introduce this mechanic because we will be seeing this, I think, in almost every boss battle after this one. Okay, my strategy against the Chocobo Eater was, first of all, to use Yuna to cast Null Frost when it's gonna do its Blizzard attack. And I also used Auron and Kimahri for doing physical damage. These 2 guys were the heroes in my playthrough. I gave them a lot of cheers and just let them hack away. And I also should have given Kimahri a Water Strike weapon. I don't think I did in this fight because I did not know it was weak to water. So, but you can give Kimahri a Water Strike weapon. Now there's also a tactic you might use where you put Lulu in the front line and you let her use water spells, but then only she can do damage unless you combine both strategies. You can give her some focuses and she also, yeah, but she doesn't have the HP to stay in the front line, so you'll need to switch her out very often. I haven't tried it because I don't have time to try out everything, but in theory it should be possible. Now the Chocobo Eater hits hard, and its Fist of Fury is technically an auto kill, actually a one shot for one of your characters. So try to cast cheers to reduce the damage, and Darkness definitely works. I used Darkness a lot with Waka, and I think it hit almost all the time, even though it's resistant 20%, and also Waka doesn't have a 100% chance to inflict darkness. It does hit quite often. And Power Break also works, but remember that when it gets up or it shoves you, that Power Break is gone. Now, also very important is that time is of the essence. You don't want to wait too long to start damaging this boss, otherwise you'll go off that cliff very, very quick. Also, try to save your overdrives for wanting to bring it on its back. Trying to put it on its back, because that's when you need to do the most damage. Now, inflicting slow with the stunning steel, it did not connect with me for me that often. Now the stunning steel has, I think, a 50% chance of inflicting slow, and minus the 20% resistant, it should connect 1 out of 3 times, but I didn't have much luck in my playthrough, so I didn't really follow through with that strategy. Also, I used the time when it's on its back to heal and to buff everyone before doing the additional 500 damage to push it back. So that gives you a little bit of time to either recuperate or start buffing yourself. Now, I will also say I was happy with the kill. If you get it off that cliff, bravo, but you need some godly RNG to actually push it off that cliff. So I took the kill, and I think you should too. Now, the biggest challenges I faced with the Chocobo Eater is that its damage output is very, very high, and it starts shoving you very, very quickly. I don't know if it's the same percentage that it does that shove move, but it does it very, very often. Now, my mistake the first time, because I did it in 2 goes, in 2 tries, my mistake was that I did not deal enough damage. I was too focused on buffing and healing, and it pushed me off the cliff eventually. I couldn't recuperate. So technically it's not a game over, but let's be honest, you want to kill this boss when you're playing this game. You're not taking that he pushes you off the cliff, unless you're doing a no reload run, but if you're not doing that, you want to kill this boss. Now, only the triple blizzard came as a bit of a surprise, but we already saw elementals doing a triple elemental attack, so it's not that big of a surprise. His moves remain still very predictable. Now, I also had no idea about the water weakness. I still thought it was fire because I'm a dumbass. Now I know better, now I know to try stuff out. But it goes to show that you need to try stuff out if you want to find out something, because you shouldn't take anything for granted in this mod. Now, my final thoughts on this boss fight is the Chocobo Eater personally remains one of my favorite fights in the entire game, because of that extra danger of falling off the cliff. It's like a little tug of war with just high stakes. I enjoyed it a lot. I keep enjoying this fight because now there's also that much more pressure. He's dealing a lot more damage in a much shorter time frame. So I got shoved off once, but in the second go, in the second attempt, I actually got it, and because I did more damage, and I was able to defeat it. Now, my tips would be: do not stop dealing damage, or you'll get shoved off quickly and you're dead. Make sure that when it's lying on its back, to take that time to maybe heal a little bit and buff yourself up a little bit, and indeed use water attacks instead of fire attacks. Now, I'm gonna give this boss fight 2 stars. It was definitely a little bit more difficult, but with the right strategy, I was able to do it. Little tweaks here and there to get into the flow, and despite one technical game over, let's say, I got into the groove very quickly, and I gave him something he couldn't digest. So, 2 stars. Okay, next up on our list is Sinspwn Gui. Now, this boss fight is actually 2 boss fights with Sinspwn Gui. The first one is a little bit more difficult than the second one. The second one is less lethal and requires technically the same strategy, but the second one you also have Seymour in your party, so it shouldn't be a big of a deal. When looking at their stats, you can see that the first one and the second one are a little bit different. The first one still has the same HP, however it has higher magic, higher defense and magic defense, and also slightly higher agility, and also significantly higher luck, so he's gonna crit more often. The second Sinspwn has a slight increase in strength, but doesn't have the increase in magic defense. All other stats are the same between them. Looking at their resistances and immunities, the first Sinspwn Gui has a 20% resistance to provoke, as does the second one. They're both also immune to sensor and scan, like all bosses. However, the first one additionally has gravity proof, so it's immune to demi-like attacks. It also has fire ward, and it also has Aeon ward, which means it will take half damage from fire and from your Aeon attacks. Now, the biggest change compared to the original game is that the head of Sinspwn Gui is not targetable. This head does a devastating attack, a devastating venom attack, that you can avoid if you hit the head with Waka or with Lulu's magic. But in this case, the venom attack that Sinspwn Gui's head does is unavoidable because it's not targetable. Now, additionally, when this venom attack hits, it will have a 50% chance of inducing slow on that character. Also, its defense will go up significantly when it's guarding with its arms, which technically just means that do not bother attacking the body when its arms are up, because it will do almost no damage. Also, the head will do a thunder attack that hits all your characters. Now, we've seen that before with Chocobo Eater with the Blizzard, or the regular elementals doing a triple magic attack. Now, Sinspwn Gui does that also when its head does a thunder attack. And additionally, when its head does that attack, it will automatically dispel Power Break on itself. Now, I already introduced the status drops with the Chocobo Eater. Now, this boss also has a status drop attack. When it does its regular attack with its body, the amount of turns you have Protect will be reduced by 2. But at this stage you shouldn't have Protect, so unless you've been grinding a lot, and naughty for doing that, unless you've been grinding a lot, you shouldn't have Protect at this stage. Now, I think its moveset remains relatively the same. It's very predictable. Its head and its body have a separate turn in the turn order. The body will always do a physical attack followed by a demi attack. Now, I have no idea why. It is simple, but I have no idea why, but I did not see it. I always thought it was a 50-50% chance, but I looked back and I really saw that it was always a physical attack and then a demi attack. Now, the head will also cycle through certain moves. It will first do a thunder on all characters, which does around 400 damage. Then the head moves suspiciously, and in the original game that would be the point to either attack it with Waka or with magic, but in this case it's not targetable, so the move after that will be the venom attack that does 700 plus damage and can induce poison or slow. So my strategy was as follows. I always try to do an all shock with Yuna to overcome the thunder. Sometimes I forgot, or sometimes I just couldn't do it because it wasn't her turn before the thunder would strike. Now, you need to try to anticipate healing, because the demi can nullify that quickly. Like if you healed Auron or your entire party with a mega potion and then the demi comes up, that's actually devastating. That's actually a waste of a healing. So try to keep that in mind when healing. Now, similar to the original game, I try to hit the arms to open up the body and use an occasional overdrive or Aeon overdrive to do massive damage on everything, and also try to do cheers to increase your defense and to increase your damage output. Now, with Auron you can also do a power break, but keep in mind when it does the thunder attack, that power break is gone. Lulu is also very valuable in this fight just for doing magic damage. Just keep in mind not to do fire damage because it has fire ward. casting haste with Tidus can also be very significant and can be a big deal in this fight. You can cast haste on Yuna for healing, you can cast haste on Tidus to do more cheers, or you can just cast haste on anyone for some item spamming, because you're going to do lots of healing in this fight. Everyone is on healing duty, Yuna the most, just for using items and the occasional Phoenix down if one of your party members is down. Now Tidus could also use Provoke. I did not use it, I didn't try it, but maybe using Provoke could be good just to focus all the attacks on one character. And also try to do indeed as many cheers as possible to reduce that physical damage. I also needed to stay very concentrated to keep track of its moves. Now the Venom is the most devastating attack and you need to keep track of it just so you can be able to tank it when it comes. And also get rid of the poison with an antidote as fast as possible. You cannot finish this fight if all your characters are crippled with poison. Maybe having some slow ward armor might help. And also indeed you can overcome the slow with haste if you have the MP for it. Now Waka was pretty useless in this fight. He tanked some damage of course, but that is actually all he could do. Even his overdrive couldn't target everything. It can only target one target, so it wasn't really that, he wasn't really that helpful. Now just to say, when you look at the video of my attempt, I went into this fight actually as a trial, not really to win, just to explore, but eventually that attempt would lead to the win, but I have lost a lot of resources while doing it. And also it was a very long fight, chipping away a little bit of HP each time. Really, I was just trying to stay alive during that encounter. Now, briefly, the second Sinspwn is much easier. Definitely with Seymour in your party, it should not be a big problem. Now, maybe you can keep in mind to keep Orin and Yuna healthy enough, because these are the two characters that will be accompanying him when you fight the second Sinspwn Gui. Now, the challenges that I faced were definitely the head not being targetable. That was a real surprise for me, because that's such an important thing to be able to do in this fight. Also, winning after a very bad start was actually a big challenge for me. Maybe the triple thunder, but like I've said before, it's not that big of a surprise at this point in the game. Now, what went wrong during my attempt? Now, I had almost a game over. Because I didn't track HP enough. You need to heal your party, so definitely when the Venom hits, make sure your party has enough HP to overcome that Venom attack. Now, I didn't try if focuses worked to prevent it, but cheer did not. I also did insufficient healing, like I said, so heal enough, and I also wasted all my Phoenix downs just trying to recuperate from this fight. And I sometimes forgot Null Shock. You need to keep track of a lot of things in this fight. Now, my final thoughts for this fight are that this was a very fun fight. I had a lot of fun. This was a real endurance fight. It was very nerve-wracking. You're just trying to stay alive, and I did not expect the win, but having eventually that win was a huge dopamine rush. So I had a lot of fun with it, just because the relief of defeating it was so much fun. So my tips would be not to forget doing Null Shock when it does its thunder, because you just cannot afford to have that additional damage on your party when you're already trying to survive the Venom attacks. And also know when these Venom attacks are coming. You need to anticipate for it and get rid of that poison when you are poisoned. Now, I'm going to give this fight 3 stars. Although it was tough, I got it eventually on the first go with a little bit of luck. But hey, I got the win. It's a real endurance fight. You're really just trying to stay alive at certain points, reviving your characters, healing your characters, so it's a real tough fight. But eventually I made a very gooey mess of the Sinspwn and I got them both, so 3 stars. Going further down our list, we have arrived at Extractor. Now, you encounter this boss when crossing the Moonflow and Yuna gets kidnapped by the Albed. It is an underwater fight, so you will only have Waka and Tidus in your party. Looking at its stats, it has definitely been bumped up significantly in my opinion. Now it has 50% more HP from 4 to 6,000. It has a slight increase in strength, but it has a much higher increase in both magic defense and magic defense. And like most bosses, just a tiny bit more luck just to get that occasional extra crit in. Now additionally, Extractor is now 30% resistant to slow. In the readme it also states it has 0% haste resistance. I'm not sure why it's in there. It must have some meaning. If anybody knows, just let me know. It already had 0% resistant to haste, so I am not sure why it's in there. Additionally, it is still immune to sensor and scan, and in the original game it was vulnerable to thunder damage, but now it just takes normal damage to thunder. But remember that it's still resistant to the other elements. Now, just like in the original game, it can be provoked. However, it still has a 50% resistance to provoke. However, when it's provoked, its magic stats will increase to a whopping 38. Now, its magic increased also in the original game, but here it will increase much more significantly. The Aqua Shooter has now a 40% chance of inducing silence for 3 turns and inducing sleep, a 50% chance of sleep for 2 turns. Now, just like in the original game, it will either do it once or twice. It will have a 50% chance of doing it a second time before it will do its rise move. Now, when it rises, it will be readying its depth charges. Now, in this mod, when it rises, it has a 75% chance of inducing haste on itself, but in the readme it says for 0 turns. Now, I'm not sure what the reason is. Maybe it's CTB related, but that's what happens. But also, additionally, it will give himself a 1 cheer, so his defense and his attack power will have increased. Now, we all know to prevent the depth charges, and to do that you need to do 500 damage in the original game, I think it is. But now in the mod you need to do 550 damage, so a 10% more. Now, when it eventually dives, when you do the damage and it dives, it heals itself just a little bit. But when it releases its depth charges, it will do a significant amount of damage and also have an 80% chance of inducing darkness. I don't know how much the percentage was in the original game, but in this mod it has an 80% chance of inflicting darkness. Now, my strategy was actually very simple. I equipped Tidus with the stunning steel that we all should have bought in Luca, and I equipped Waka with a thunderball. Now, I didn't know that it took regular damage from thunder, but actually a regular weapon would also do, with a strength plus 3 and 5%. I think would be a little bit better actually, because it's resistant to the other element, but using a regular thunderball should also be fine. Now, with the stunning steel I tried to slow it, and it connected actually quite often. Despite it having a 30% resistance, it connected actually quite often. Now, I also try to hit it very often, so that's why probably it connected very regularly. Now, thunder can still be necessary, but a regular weapon can also be just fine. Now, from the original game, you should know that you need to do around 500 damage to take it down, so that's actually important to know. So you actually need to prepare yourself to be able to do that amount of damage in about 2 turns. So it's important that you get cheers in with Tidus, and maybe also the occasional haste to actually do more damage, or to get more cheers in before it gets its turn. Now, don't forget to heal, because you only have 2 characters, so healing should be important still, but at this point you should have enough healing items, so that should not be a problem. I did not try to provoke it with Tidus. It's actually possible, but I didn't try it. It will focus probably the Aqua Shooter on Tidus, but I didn't use it and I didn't try it. Now, to be very honest, there weren't that many challenges that I faced during this fight. It was actually a relatively easy fight, in my opinion. I had it well under control. Now, it does do more damage, but if you have enough healing items, it shouldn't be a problem to mitigate that. I got it actually on the first try. I actually thought it was going to be much harder, so maybe I over-prepared, but I did not face any big challenges during this fight. Now, my final thoughts are that the fight was actually a little bit underwhelming. I was really surprised I got it that quickly. Like I said, I was probably just overcautious from the previous fights, boss fights I've been in. In the end, it was still fun to have like an easy win now and again. Like, we cannot be tensed all the time in this mod. It was fun to have a more easier boss fight win in the end. Now, my tips would be, just like in the original game, get the stunning steel, slow it down, get your cheers in, and you'll be fine. So in the end, I'll give it 1 star. It was very similar to the original game, and we quickly got that Albet junk to the scrap heap, so no real difficulties. 1 star. Next up is the infamous Spherimorph. Now, this enemy appears at the end of Macalania Woods right before obtaining your very first Jagged Sphere. Now, its basic stats, and I say basic for a reason, you'll see later, its basic stats have been bumped up tremendously, in my opinion. Its strength has gone up by 50% and its magic also almost by 50%. It has a slightly higher agility and also a little bit more luck. Now, it has significantly more resistances. It's now immune to armor break, and it has an 80% resistance to both power and magic break. So if you're going to try magic break, it is really not going to connect that often. It is also warded against items like the items from Riku, like Grenade or Arctic Wind, Electro Marble, those kinds of things. And it's also taking half damage from all of your Aeons and the gravity element like Demis. I was surprised to see in the readme that it did not have immunity to sensor and scan, but I looked for it in a guide and it already had immunity to sensor and scan, which makes sense, especially what this fight is all about. Now, there has been a lot of tweaking in this boss, and I will go over them. Now, the first thing is that if you use the wrong magical attack with Lulu, it will counter with a triple thunder. Additionally, it will also do several status drop moves, so that means several positive statuses will be reduced. For example, when it does an attack move, a regular attack like it on a single character, if that character has Protect on, the amount of turns it will have Protect will be reduced by 2. When it does its press attack, so when it targets all characters with its physical attack, everyone that will have Protect on, the amount of turns will be reduced by 3. And additionally, when it does any elemental attack, if that character would have Shell, the amount of turns will be reduced by 3. Right, so we all know that this boss has different elements, and it will shift through those elements during the fight. Now, it starts with being a random element, and if attacked with the right opposing element, like when the Spherimorph is currently having the fire element and doing fire attacks on you, you need to do a Blizzara, and then it will shift elements. So that I didn't say anything new normally, that is also how it goes in the original game. However, a little bit changing here, when it shifts elements, it will slightly heal, but it will also dispel all breaks and poison. So when it's constantly going to shift element, so it will constantly remove poison and breaks from itself, unless you use some kind of tactic so that it won't shift, but we'll come to that later. Now, actually, the biggest change here is that for each element, it will change its stats. Now for fire, ice, thunder and water, it will have different stats. Now I will go over them and you will see that they are very different from each other. So when its current element is fire, it will be a more magic based boss. Its strength will decrease a little bit and its magic will be increased a little bit. And it will be, of course, still weak to ice. When it has shifted to the ice element, it is a more strength-based foe. That means only its strength will be increased a little bit. The magic will remain the basic stat, like I described before, and it will be, of course, weak to fire. When it shifts to the thunder element, its strength will decrease a little, but its agility will increase significantly to a whopping 25. And also its luck stat will increase tremendously to 30, which means it will crit much more often, which definitely happened during my playthrough in this mod. And of course it's also weak to water. Now the worst one of all is when it shifts to the water element. Then it will be a very tactical based boss according to the readme. Not only will the magic stat increase by 5 because it doesn't have enough magic already, it will also have magic booster, which means magic damage is doubled. And I definitely saw that happen during my playthrough and I had no idea what was going on. And of course it's also weak to thunder. Now maybe a little side note, so each element also has a certain percentage. If it's poisoned, the percentage poison damage it takes shifts a little, but it's between 0 and 2%, not very significant, and it's also maybe not that relevant because it's actually very difficult to poison. The strategy that I eventually used to overcome Spherimorph doesn't differ that much from the original game. Now you still need to try to find out what element it currently is. Now 99% of you that already play this game know that you need to do a physical attack, a non-elemental physical attack, to find out what its element is. But for some reason, you can see it in my playthroughs, I struggled with that. It took me time to find out because I was using physical attacks with weapons that have a certain element. I thought that would give me an edge in finding out which element it would be weak to, but it actually didn't work and it actually led to a game over eventually. So my brain was fried, I think, at that moment. Everybody knows you just need to do a regular physical attack to find out which element it currently has. At the start of the battle and every time it shifts, it will change its stats and also its elements. So I thought about two approaches actually to this fight. So the first approach is that you know that it does not shift element when you do a physical attack. It just counters with the element that it currently has. So my idea first was, okay, so I will not use the opposing element, so it will not shift. I will not use elements at all. I will keep doing physical attacks and I will just make sure that the one attacking, like Auron or Kimari, or not Waka because Waka's damage is horrible, they have the null armor, as well as null armor for that element. But that didn't really work out in the end. The problem really was that it still does a lot of physical damage, and if it has the wrong element, if it has high strength, then we will take a lot of damage. And it was difficult to heal with Yuna, or I had to use loads of items, and eventually that press attack takes away 50% of your health, so it wasn't really a doable tactic, and that's actually the mistake I made. I switched tactics also mid-fight, and that really threw me off and eventually made me lose the attempt. Now maybe it's possible if you do like a Mighty Guard, or if you get the power break to connect and you do not make it shift, then the power break stays. So maybe that is a tactic, but I think the second one I propose is a better one, like the one that you should also use in the original game. You just determine the element with a physical attack and then you just counter it with Lulu, because Lulu here is the MVP in this fight again. She does high magical damage, and she can do the damage that's necessary to actually take it down, because it has high HP. It still has 16,000 HP, I think. No, it's less. It's 12,000. So go in with Lulu, do the damage, rinse and repeat, and maybe try to mitigate the elemental damage using focus, because it's difficult to predict how much the damage will be due to the stat changes constantly. You can also try protect with Riku. I didn't do it actually, so I mean using a curtain, but I didn't do it because I didn't know beforehand. But also keep in mind the status drops when doing physical attacks. It will reduce your amount of turns you have protect, so keep that also in mind. The Lulu overdrives were very helpful. They do high damage between 2,000 and 3,000 each time. Also Aeon overdrives help tremendously. They do over 1,000 damage, but of course use them at the correct time when you have the opposing element. Now a random null spell here and there from Yuna can also be helpful, but she will be probably busy healing everyone, and sometimes you just need to take a chance because the attacks can be evaded actually quite often. Maybe try some reflex or buffing, but just having sometimes low HP and hoping that it doesn't attack that specific character was sometimes needed, actually in my case, just to overcome this boss. Now this fight was actually quite challenging for me. I did it in 2 attempts, and the first one I lost because I tried 2 strategies at a time, and then I switched from actually the first strategy to the second one I proposed before, but that led to a game over because I just wasn't able to recuperate. The sudden change in stats when it shifts its elements is very off-throwing. At one point the magic damage is relatively low, then suddenly it's very, very high, and at that point you're not really connecting the dots yet. It's easy to say in hindsight that I should have known, but at that point I had no idea what was going on at that point. I had no idea what was happening. I only connected the dots when I read the readme. Especially be afraid when the water element is coming up, because that is a super dangerous state for it to be in. The regeneration after the elemental shift makes the fight just take a little bit longer. It heals a little bit, so it just takes a little bit longer. I only had 1 game over. I adjusted my strategy and I focused on a single way forward on that new strategy, and I stuck with it eventually to take the win. Now my final thoughts on it, that is that the elemental shift is fun, but also frustrating. Definitely in this mod because of its damage output being very wonky. At one point the physical attacks are doing okay damage, and then it's high damage, then the same for the magic damage. It's very much of a roller coaster, this fight. So I really had a tough time. It was frustrating at some points, but on the other hand, just like the Chocobo Eater with the cliff, this little quirk, this little puzzle is a very fun thing. I like it a lot when there's just this other layer to a boss battle. I like fun quirks in a boss battle. Now tips would be to put Lulu in the front always, and just go for option 2. Find out the element it's weak to, cast that, use her overdrives, use Aeon overdrives, rinse and repeat. Maybe try some more focuses, because I definitely didn't do enough. And Aeons help indeed as well. Riku's Mighty Guard could be helpful as well, but I would hold on to her overdrive for the next battle you're going to encounter. Just a tip. In the end, I will still give Spherimorph 3 stars. It is a very noticeable difference in difficulty, just because of those wonky stat changes that throw you completely off, especially the magic booster and that increase in agility when it's in its thunder form are very lethal. Now the physical attacks only add to that, and I had only 1 game over, but it was a very proper strategic fight and I liked it a lot. But eventually I kicked this sphery ball back to where it came from, so 3 stars. Okay, my friends, we have finally arrived at the crawler. Now, this boss fight is not long after Spherimorph. You encounter it when you enter Lake Macalania, right before Macalania Temple. And it's actually a second Albed kidnap attempt on Yuna. When looking at its stats, we don't see many differences. We see a slight increase in strength, a small drop in magic, but that's for a reason. You're gonna see why. The biggest difference is in its defense and its magic defense. They have been decreased a lot, so you're going to do a lot less physical and magical damage in this fight. Also, its luck has slightly increased, like with all bosses, just so they can get that extra critical hit in at the wrong time. In terms of resistances and immunities, it has now a 50% resistance to slow, which will be very significant. It also has gravity proof, so it takes no damage from Demi, but you shouldn't have Demi at this point. It also has item ward, so items from Riku, like the Electro Marbles or anything else, will be reduced by half. In the original game it was vulnerable to thunder damage, but in this mod it will take normal damage from thunder, but don't forget it is still resistant to all other elements. And I'm sounding like a broken record here, it is immune to sensor and scan. Now there are some special circumstances in this mod. To begin with, the fight starts with the Negator doing thunder on everyone in your party, doing about 500 damage, I think. And also, there is no summoning ever in this fight. Never ever can you summon. Even when the Negator is gone, you cannot summon an Aeon, and that will be very problematic. The moveset of Crawler has been tweaked immensely. Now, first of all, it will counter every lightning attack you will do. It will counter all lightning attacks immediately with an assault. Now, the rest of the time it will counter only 40% of attacks, which is still significant. Almost 1 out of 2 attacks it will always counter. The Gatling gun it does has a 10% chance of inflicting slow for 2 turns, and that is each hit. So each hit of that Gatling gun has a 10% chance of inducing slow on your character. So you will see slow happening a lot on your characters. It also has status drop, so when it does its assault counter attack and you have protect on, your protect will be reduced by 4 turns. And when it does its mana beam, and it will do its mana beam, the mana beam will reduce shell by 6 turns. Now, the biggest difference with the original game is what I'm going to explain now. So the Negator that's floating above prevents summoning and magic. Just like in the original game, it prevents any summoning and any magic from your party or from the crawler itself. So normally when the Negator is up, it also prevents the crawler from using its big mana beam attack. Now, as a little bit off throwing for me is that the crawler will eliminate its own Negator in its first move. So the first thing it does is it will kill its own Negator if you already haven't. Now, this prevents you from using a strategy where you just leave the Negator flying and you just don't use magic or summoning and you just pummel it to death with physical attacks. So this is not possible in this mod. Secondly, in the original game, you might or might not know, if it's going to use its mana beam, using 4 lightning based attacks will stop the mana beam from happening. But you guessed it, not anymore in this mod, not anymore. Now when you do 4 lightning attacks, it will do a null shock on itself and it will cast also aim on itself. And then the cycle just repeats every time you do 4 lightning attacks, again a null shock that you need to get rid of, which is annoying, and aim. So you will have a more difficult time evading its attacks. So to sum up, the mana beam is unavoidable, and you also cannot shield it with an Aeon. So it does huge damage and you need to be able to be ready for it. Additionally, it's not over yet, no. When it has done its mana beam, it will cast focus on itself, meaning that it will just improve its magic stat and its magical defense stat, meaning that the next mana beam will hit much harder, and that this increase in damage will be very significant when the fight, as the fight takes longer. Also, after the mana beam, he will also heal himself for a little bit of HP. Now, in terms of the strategy that I used, I find that Shell and Protect were my bestest of friends in this fight. But you also need to keep in mind the status drops. Now, just to be perfectly clear, I don't know beforehand about the status drops. I do not look at the details, at the stats before a boss fight. I only look at them afterwards, so I do not know about these status drops beforehand. So you need to keep those in mind, that it might happen if you're doing a blind run, for example. But my tactic actually was to use Mighty Guard with Riku. That's why I saved her overdrive and not used it on against Spherimorph. And I used actually a super Mighty Guard. So I cast it on 3 party members: Shell, Protect, Regen, and Haste. I did that on Riku, Lulu, and Tidus. In hindsight, I might have maybe done it on Auron as well, but I didn't want to do it on Auron for a very specific reason. Now, Protect, Shell, and Regen lasts a very long time, so remember me saying that positive statuses in this mod are finite. The ones for a Super Mighty Guard are actually quite long. It's a whopping 40 turns. But do not expect this Mighty Guard to last the entire fight. It will definitely wear off before you get rid of Crawler. Now, the Haste is only for 8 turns, so that will wear off actually rather quick. So what I did is I casted Mighty Guard on Lulu, Tidus, and Riku, and then I started attacking with Lulu, and I also brought Auron in the front line, and I used Guard with him along with a Protect from a curtain, using a curtain with Riku. Now, Auron was going to guard constantly, and additionally with Tidus I casted Slow on Auron so that the guard would stay up, because it will wear off when it's Auron's next turn. So I wanted to delay that as much as possible. Also, because Guard costs MP in this mod. I don't think Guard costs any MP in the original game. I have forgotten so much about the original game just by playing this mod. So that's actually why it's good to delay Auron's next turn as much as possible. So I used this combination: Lulu in the front line, Auron in the front line. Auron has Protect and Guard, and when Lulu attacks, Auron will soak up the counter attack from Crawler, so that Lulu will not get damaged. Additionally, I also used many lunar and light curtains on other party members, especially near the end of the fight when the Mighty Guard starts to wear off. You need to cast Shell with Yuna. I did not have Protect at that point, so I used curtains from Riku to give Protect to other characters whenever that was necessary. Now, the mana beam in this fight is a very big problem. Now, Yuna is the healer in our party. She was healing and also casting Shell, but keep in mind the status drop from the mana beam. When you cast Shell, it will reduce the amount of turns you have Shell. Additionally, when Yuna heals a shelled character, the healing will be much less potent. Now with Tidus, I tried to cast Haste on Lulu or Yuna as much as possible, but I also definitely tried using Slow on the Crawler. It's not immune to Slow, but it's definitely very resistant. I think I needed to use it 3 times before the Slow connected, and it's definitely worth it because you want to slow down that mana beam from happening, and you also want to get more damage in order to eventually kill it, because it has a lot of HP. It has 16,000 HP. For quality of life, I also gave everyone a lightning strike weapon, because when he does the null shock after getting 4 lightning attacks, it's very easy to get rid of it just by using a weapon with lightning strike. Now, there was also an idea where you could spam reflex from Lulu so that the counter attacks would not hit that often. I did not use that tactic, but it's definitely something that I could have tried, or maybe that you could try in your runs. Additionally, it will also help avoiding the Gatling gun. Now Kimari and Waka were almost useless in this fight, yeah, poor Waka actually. But they eliminated some null shocks with their lightning strike weapons a few times, so they weren't 100% useless in this case. Now also at this point I had a piece of armor for Tidus that has a new ability that has been introduced in this mod, and that is Rune Veil. Now shortly spoken, Rune Veil increases your MP and magic defense by 40%. It increases your resistance to death, petrify, but also haste by 20%. It increases your resistance to all the breaks, all other positive statuses by 15%, and all other statuses, so also the negative ones, it will increase your resistance by 25%. On the contrary, you are now weak to fire, ice, thunder, water, holy, and gravity attacks. And to top it off, you have SOS Shell, which is nice, but also SOS Slow. This is a very special piece of armor which can have drawbacks, so it has advantages and disadvantages, but I also decided to wear it for Tidus, especially because of the increased MP and magic defense. So a special piece of armor that I actually like wearing, at the right time of course. Now in terms of challenges and surprises, Crawler killing its own negator really caught me off guard. I really didn't think he would do that, but this eliminates a certain tactic you could use by leaving the eliminator floating and just using physical attacks. But this eliminates that possibility, and it actually makes a little bit of sense in this mod that you need to take the mana beam in order to win this. Now the biggest challenge was, that said, mana beam. It makes this also a little bit of a time-based encounter where the damage is always increased, and it's always by a little bit, so it creeps up on you in the end, and eventually you take huge damage from this mana beam. It also gets stronger by protecting itself using the focuses. It increases its magic defense, so it becomes harder to kill using magic. And when the shell wears off, eventually you're in trouble, so make sure before the mana beam you always have shell on. So I originally thought during my playthrough that the cycle with the 4 lightning attacks and the null shock, so I thought when it did the null shock I thought it was damage based, not because I did 4 lightning attacks. So I didn't really know what was happening there, so I thought I needed to go through that cycle a few times in order to get the win, but it was actually because of 4 lightning attacks, and I didn't really caught that until I read the readme of the mod. Now your MP will get drained. My MP was drained eventually from Tidus and from Lulu, so I had to use 2 Eaters in order to get more hastes and more magical damage in. So be ready to use those Eaters, even though you want to save them for the end, you're gonna have to use them. And even though I had a sound strategy with the Super Mighty Guard, it eventually, wore off, and that plan a little bit falls apart, and then it becomes an endurance fight, trying to stay alive, and you need to improvise and maybe use some items with Riku, but be ready for your plan to fall apart. Now I died on the first try, but I really was just getting to know the boss, and the second time I came in with a strategy, and I went for it and eventually got the win at the second try. So my final thoughts on this fight was that it was really a fight like against Sinspwn or against Sinspwn Gui. It's an endurance fight, you're constantly hoping it will be over, you keep on doing damage but it just won't die and it just keeps on going. It's that kind of a fight, and it's a really nerve-wracking fight, but those kinds of fights I love because when you eventually do get that final hit in, it is so satisfying. My tips for this fight would be to use Riku and use her Mighty Guard or Super Mighty Guard. Get a lot of turns with Shell and Protect because you are going to need them. And definitely try slow. If it doesn't connect the first time, try it a second time. If it hits, it's huge because you will be able to do more damage and delay that mana beam. And another tip is to just hang in there. You're just 1 attack away from getting that win. So I will give this boss fight 3 stars. It is definitely much harder than the original, and it's just hard in general because the mana beam is unavoidable. It's very difficult to stay alive at certain points in the fight, and you need to keep doing damage simultaneously. So I really had to cook up a good strategy from the start to get the win and crawl out the other end, so 3 stars. Well, there you have it. This was indeed a long video, so thank you for sticking with me till the end. Normally I would have maybe done this in 2 videos, but I said I would do the next one until Crawler, and I keep my promises. So the difficulty in this mod definitely went up in this part of the game. The fights definitely took longer and it required me more tries and sometimes a little bit of luck to get the win. But what I've learned is that I should maybe take my time to get to know the boss fight, find the strategy, find its weaknesses, its cycles. So maybe take some time to get to know the boss fight. I should not be stingy on resources. That's what I learned with Sinspwn Gui. Use those resources, you have them for a reason. And also I need to expect huge curveballs, like for Spherimorph, the elemental shift and the shift in stats, along with the crawler killing its own negator, the mana beam. These are all curveballs that I should expect from this mod. But still, we have no 4-star boss fight, but I think that might change very, very soon. If you want to actually see me fight these bosses, I've put a playlist for the commentary playthrough in the description, along with links to all videos with the winning attempt. And that sums it up for the moment. I'm in no way a Final Fantasy X expert, but I love playing it, and these are my thoughts about fighting the Pbirdman modded storyline bosses from the Chocobo Eater up until and including Crawler. I hope you found this useful or entertaining, and I hope to continue the series when I get to beat a few more bosses. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment if you think I got something wrong, if you want to add to the review. I'm happy to read about it. I know things will get more brutal, so I'm expecting much more content about fighting these bosses, and I really enjoy talking about their modded attacks, patterns and stats, and I hope you do too. Probably the next video will be a special episode about the first Seymour encounter, so we'll see how much I will suffer there. And I hope you will all join me next time as well. Catch you later, guys. Cheers!